What do you think the best sword is?
The best sword? The katana is the best sword. I mean, everybody knows that.
You really believe that?
Yeah, like it has the best technology of its time.
You're being serious right
Hold
now.
on. Let's make this interesting, shall we?
Okay. 100 baht says the katana is not the best sword and that you're wrong.
Fine. If you really want to bet on it, I'm game.
Okay then. Hello viewers. This is Mark
Hello?
and this is Francis and I'm Binara. We are gonna find the best sword.
And I'm gonna prove them wrong.
If we can.
Before the age of Islam, battles were waged by swords. Each nation had their own sword. The katana is a sword used by the Japanese samurai. Now we will see Mark and find out more about the katana. Hey Mark.
Hey, I found this really interesting stuff about the katana, you see? You see why I was telling it's the best engineered sword because it has collected together like years of developments in this field of sword making. You see, the earliest swords were made from copper. That was like the first metal that people found. And copper is very soft, right? It can bend easily. And that's when they mixed it with tin and it became bronze. So this was not necessarily something that was found by the Japanese, obviously it was something that was found much before by earlier civilizations. But what's special about the Japanese katana is that it has a really developed technology in it, and which is what I'm going to explain to you now. An important characteristic of the sword is that it should be both sharp as well as it should be able to bear the vibration of the impact. So the important thing about steel is that it's a mixture of iron and carbon. And iron is very soft. But when we mix it with carbon, we can make it harder. But if you put too much of carbon, it becomes too hard and that makes it brittle and it will snap. So what the Japanese did was, in this katana, to get the best sword, what they did is they mixed two layers of steel. The outer layer had more carbon and the inner layer had less carbon. So the outer layer, which was like the shell of the sword, was hard, while the inside of the sword, the core, was soft. It had less carbon in it. And that meant that the Japanese sword could have a really hard, sharp edge, while as its core would be soft, and that would make the sword both flexible and able to bear the vibration of the impact. So that's why I'm saying this is one of the best and most advanced engineered swords, where people actually took time to build the sword to meet their requirement and not just came up with a sword and then found a method of using it to match the sword. So we caught up with Diresh Mendis, who is a practitioner of Aikido, and he will tell us something about the Japanese style of sword fighting.
Alright, well, let's begin with this. What's the sword you're holding?
This is not a sword, it's called a bukoto.
Okay.
It's a wooden practice sword.
A replica of?
A katana.
Okay.
Katana.
Basically a replica of it. It's about half the weight of it actually.
So can you tell us a bit more about the technology that goes into the sword?
Yeah.
It's a long process, it usually takes months on end.
Okay.
Okay.
So take us through it.
Basically what happens is they get different grades of iron ore
Okay.
and they melt it with charcoal.
Right.
So they melt the steel there.
Okay.
And after inspection they pick out the good pieces of steel with the right amount of carbon in it.
Okay.
And then they take it then they take it to the blacksmiths.
Okay.
The blacksmith, what he does is he melts the thing over again and he repeatedly hammers it and keeps folding metal on it.
All right. Okay.
And after that, once he gets like a nice long bar, then he decides to make the shape.
Right.
Once he gets the shape done, so obviously it's a single bladed sword, so you have the cutting edge on this side and the non-cutting edge on this side.
So does it have a particular certain curve that it should have?
Yes,
Okay.
but that varies on the length of the sword.
Right.
Purpose of the curve being?
Better cutting
Slashing.
cuts better.
Yeah. Slash is better.
And it also is kind of a side effect of the way they make the sword.
Alright, so let's kind of get into the cultural impacts that this sword has had. So only samurais could have this sword at any one time. Is that true?
It's not true per se, but like regular soldiers would have a katana too.
Oh.
But obviously it won't be as
Ornate.
ornate or just the same
High quality.
Yeah, you wouldn't find the same quality in normal soldiers.
So has there been a particular time in history where this particular sword, the katana, has been a changing moment where in a battle or something?
While not in a battle that changed the entire culture of Japan or something like of that sort, it has had a lot of impacts on how Japanese people perceive their lifestyle in general.
Okay.
In that has more to do with the samurai code rather than the katana.
Right.
But there's one particular samurai. He's renowned through Japan and throughout history in general. His name was Musashi Miyamoto. He formed this doctrine, this philosophy of enlightenment through the path of the sword.
What kind of variations of the katana are there?
There is a lot of variations of the katana. This is just a standard katana,
Okay.
lengthwise. But there is a sword.
How long is this?
It varies from 72 to about 80 centimeters.
Okay.
But there is a version of the katana called the kodaichi which goes up to about 120 centimeters.
Okay.
Or there are also the longer anti-cavalry swords that go on with usually about 7 feet long.
7 feet.
7 feet long.
Yeah.
Carried on someone's back.
So that was
How do
just-
you use that?
that was meant to be used in formation against charging cavalry.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Because when someone
Right.
slashed.
Okay, so you had the anti-cavalry swords. Did you have any shorter variety?
Yes, the samurai would always carry at least 2 swords.
Okay.
One would be the katana, the other would be the wakizashi,
Okay.
which is a shorter sword about that size.
The Japanese are generally smaller built than the Europeans. So like,
Yeah.
how did that play into the design of the sword?
Well, I think
compared
that's
to-
part of the reason why they engineered the sword so well.
Okay.
Because they don't have that sheer
Brute
brute
force.
force.
Brute force. Yeah.
So, what you can't do with brute force, do with precision. This is actually a Thai sword. It's called a dap, but the length is roughly the size of wakizashi. The hilt and the handle are completely different.
Okay.
All right, so this would be the kind of sword that you'd use for quick fighting.
Pretty much, yeah. But except this is made of a single piece of steel.
Whereas you'd have two tempered steels.
Yeah,
Two
you'd have-
tempered steels.
Yeah.
Thank you for that wonderful demonstration and for all the information. It was
Very informative.
Thanks. Swords have shaped our culture from time immemorial. A lot of our cultural practices began because of the sword. We button our coats from left to right to keep our sword hand free. We shake hands when we meet to show that we are not armed. When escorting a lady, we take them by the right hand because a sword would hang on the left. Swords represent the culture and peoples they come from. A good example of this is the Sri Lankan flag, which depicts a lion carrying a kastane, which is an ancient Sri Lankan sword. Even today, in Great Britain, swords are used for ceremonial purposes. The long sword of the Christian West represented the cross, while the curved sword of the Muslim Arabs represented the crescent. And so came the word crusade, war of the cross. Swords were often considered to be connected to the spiritual and the supernatural. They were buried with their owners, as seen in Celtic graves. According to the legend of King Arthur, the sword Excalibur was given to him by the lady in the lake. Joan of Arc thought that God had given her her sword to win victories against the English. Today, swords have become a cultural heritage from our past. It symbolizes justice, discipline, honor, and bravery. It has been adopted into dance forms such as those in the Arabian Peninsula, and in sports and martial arts. It has developed into the lightsaber in Star Wars and continues to fuel our imagination in books and legends. Even today, children still play with sticks as with swords. The sword may no longer be used as a weapon, but its legacy still lives on in our hearts.
So, Francis, I met Mark the other day and he had some pretty interesting facts about the katana. He pretty much convinced me that it's the best sword ever made.
Okay, well, I've got a plethora of European swords to tell you about, so ask any questions.
So, if katana was not the best sword, tell me how other swords play their role in warfare.
Okay, so let's see. We can start with the Roman gladius. The Roman gladius was a short sword used by the Roman legion. The Roman legion were soldiers in heavy armor holding a big tower shield and their gladius. This made a lot of sense because their armor and their shield give a big burden to them. It's a big weight they have to carry around. So it made a lot of sense to have a smaller, lighter sword. Also, when they fight in formation, they fight with their shields alongside each other to have a shield wall. So it's almost impossible to draw out a very long sword, maybe like the katana. It wouldn't be easy to draw out that sword. So it makes sense to have a shorter sword. And when they're fighting in this shield formation, they can then just jab out through the gaps with this tiny sword of theirs. If it was a longer sword, they wouldn't be able to maneuver it in. So that's one advantage of the Roman sword over the katana. Then we can move on to the British greatswords, the two-handed big swords. These were swords built to deal with plate armor. Plate armor was built to deal with swords at the time, because swords at the time were focused on cutting edges, being sharp, and being very deadly in that sense. And then plate armor came along and they became pretty much useless. Because every time they hit plate armor, they would dull, they would chip, and they really didn't do any damage. So to get around that, what they did was, let's just build a sword that relies on brute strength. You have a nice big sword around 3 kilograms, not that heavy for a sword really, that big, right? It less of a sharp edge, more dulled, a bit more soft as well, right? And it had a nice big lever of a hilt, so that you can get a lot of force down onto places like the shoulders, onto the arm, hip, knees, anything like that, anywhere where the plate armor is a bit weaker. And just, you have to understand, the plate armor is weak at these places because it has to be articulated. All these plate armor pieces have to move in conjunction to each other because otherwise the person in it couldn't move very well. So then you got the opposite end of the spectrum where you have a nice short blade, like a dagger or a knife, So the katana couldn't do this job either, because when you have a nice short blade, you can just throw down whatever thing you're holding, get really close to someone in giant plate armor, and then just aim at these gaps that they have, any of the gaps in the armor, and just aim at those and stab at it. When you have something big, just like the Roman sword, you can't maneuver something that large anymore at that kind of close quarters. So then we also have the German Zweihander, which just means two-hander, also being a great sword, but this time with a harder edge meant for cutting. This was used against cavalry. You would have these in big formation with soldiers carrying them on their shoulders. These are very, very 7-foot long swords, right? Soldiers would walk into battle at the front lines against cavalry with these swords. Again, in formation, on command, they would swing down these swords, aiming for the rider of the horse, either killing it or knocking him down and just getting him out of the fight right at the start. So these kind of things couldn't be done simply by a katana. You had to have specialized for the situation.
Are there any other important properties which is missing from the katana?
Alright, there's a few things. We've talked about the katana's hardness, its ability to cut, and the fact that it's a slashing weapon. So let's look at something that it's not got. It's not a soft edge weapon, where sometimes this is really useful. Now imagine that you're an army charging into enemy territory, and month after month they're going deeper and deeper into enemy soil. You don't have the luxuries of having your own blacksmiths, having your own forges, and having your own metal shops. So with a blade like the katana that, if damaged, needs to be reheated, hammered down, grinded, and then polished, that's just work that can't be done to repair a sword anymore. So if you gotta use the equipment you have, something with a softer edge is much better to have. So let's take, for instance, a bronze sword, back from the Egyptian days. Those swords, instead of breaking and chipping and damaging like that, they would just bend, curl the edges, and maybe bend the tip. That's all that would happen, maybe a few dents. So it's a very basic fix. Whenever an army would set up base camp, a soldier himself could just hammer it out on an anvil, and then just grind the edge down and smooth it down very easily, because it's a soft edge. So that just leads, they don't have to wait for supplies, they can just keep moving forward, and as an army that's very useful to have. Next, let's take things like piercing, which the katana doesn't focus on. So let's take the French rapier or the Italian rapier. This is a sword that's purely based on piercing and thrusting. This is useful because it's used when you're just using it for personal defense. You're a person without a shield, without plate armor, and you're just in the city, you're in the town, you're a nobleman, whatever the situation. This is a very small cross-section sword, very long, very light, but it's a very small profile, so it's not hindering you in any way when you're carrying it around. And it's very simple to use, because all you do is take it out, jab. That's it. And it's a very tough, hard material, so it doesn't flex when you stab with it. Just aim for a vital organ, aim for the midriff, and that's basically the end of the fight. And since it's a very large blade, anyone that's coming up to you bare-fisted or with the knife or with even a shorter blade is at a disadvantage. So that's something the katana couldn't fulfill. It's a role that it couldn't fulfill. Another thing that a sword has to be is lightweight. Although the katana is legendary for being lightweight, it really isn't. Its average weight is about 2.5 pounds, which makes it around the same weight as a normal British longsword. The physics behind this is the lighter the blade, the faster you can swing it, the more momentum you get at the end of the tip. But seeing as it's not really that lightweight, you're not gaining a huge advantage. If you take something like the British Navy sabers, which were very long, much longer than the katana, about half a foot longer, they were actually about the same weight, or maybe 0.2 pounds heavier.
Is there anything else you would like to add to your argument?
Alright, there's a few things. So let's look at the thing that makes the katana so special, this thing called differential tempering. It's a process where heat treatment is different from one end of the sword to another, so the front end and the back end. This technology isn't unique to the katana because it was actually developed by the Chinese. It might have been perfected to a different level in Japan, but it's really not unique, so let's rule that out to begin with. Then we gotta talk about real economics of warfare. The katana is very expensive, it takes a lot of material to make, it takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of rejects, and only a few people can make them. This is really not practical in warfare. Let's look at a different comparison as the Roman gladius for the Roman legion. This sword doesn't take a lot of material, it's quick to make, most blacksmiths can make it, and it's not expensive. This is more practical, because now when you have this extra material, it can go to making your shields, making your armor, armoring your horses, things of this nature. So as you're going forward, you always have this constant supply of extra material, and it doesn't take time for the supply chain to come and reach up with you again, and you have all your backup supplies. Whereas you have this katana, it's not gonna get to you within time, you really don't have this high quality sword. The katana also, when fielded in entire army, you don't have this high quality blade for everyone. Really, only the samurai got the high quality katanas and everyone else got the rejects. So what you call legendary sword isn't all that legendary because there was only a few percent, there's a small percentage of those were actually that good. The rest of them might as well have been long swords, really. So when you're looking in real sense, the katana might have been good for Japan, but it really doesn't work for the rest of the world, considering armor, formations, shields, and the rest of the technological developments at the time. So yeah, you really can't call it the best sword.
Hey Francis.
So, Mark, so we've been discussing about all the European swords and their
Okay.
advantages against the katana.
Right, okay. So what's your verdict? Who wins the bet? What about the 200 baht?
Both of you had really good points, but
Okay.
I haven't decided on a winner yet.
Right.
But I have to rush because I have a lecture right now.
Okay.
So I'll see you later.
Okay, sure.
Sure, I guess.
A nice bag. Very, how much was it?
It was just 200 baht.
200 baht. Okay.
Wait, hold on. 200 baht?
200 baht. That's our money, right?
Wait. Winner!
Winner?
Word! I'm gonna prove him wrong.
If you can. Oh.
What the hell was that?
Aren't you going to handshake?
We'll do it again.
Okay, so we caught up with Rubesh.
That's great. You don't know the guy's name.
The katana is a Japanese sword. The katana is a Japanese sword used by the samurais in India. The katana is a Japanese sword made famous by the samurais. Samurais are elite soldiers.
Wallahi don't I?
After that, it's going to be